The giant black wolf appeared at her cottage before sunrise, carrying a tiny white pup in its jaws. The pup was frozen, silent, and completely still. Mara dropped to her knees in the snow, certain she was already too late. But instead of running from the beast, she pulled the lifeless pup against her heart and began fighting for the smallest heartbeat she could find. Then, after minutes of desperate silence, the pup suddenly gasped and cried. What Mara didn't know was that the wolf hadn't chosen her by accident, and the little pup she had just brought back to life was the last heir to the Alpha King's throne. The giant black wolf appeared at Mara's cottage just before dawn, carrying a tiny white pup between its jaws. The forest had been silent for several minutes before she heard the first crunch of snow. Mara looked up from the small fire burning inside her stone hearth. Another step, then another. Slow, heavy, close. She reached for the lantern beside her bed and moved toward the door, her bare feet making almost no sound against the wooden floor. Beyond the window, the world was buried beneath winter. Snow covered the pine branches, the narrow path, even the roof of the old cottage. The sky was still dark, but a faint gray line had begun to appear behind the mountains. Then something moved between the trees. Mara froze. Two pale eyes appeared in the darkness. The wolf stepped into the clearing. It was enormous. Its shoulders rose nearly to Mara's chest, and its thick black coat was silvered with snow. A scar ran from beneath its left eye to the edge of its jaw. Its breath rolled from its mouth in slow clouds. But Mara barely noticed the beast. She was staring at what it carried. A tiny white pup hung motionless between its jaws. The wolf crossed the clearing and stopped directly outside her door. For one long moment, neither creature moved. Then the wolf lowered its head. The pup fell gently onto the snow. Mara opened the door. Cold air rushed inside. She dropped to her knees. Oh no. The pup did not move. Its tiny chest did not rise. Its paws were stiff with cold, and a faint line of blood stained the white fur near its shoulder. Mara reached for it. The black wolf growled. She stopped. The sound vibrated through the doorway. Mara slowly raised her empty hands. I won't hurt it. The wolf watched her. Mara looked into its eyes. There was something strange there. Not rage. Not hunger. Desperation. She lowered her voice. If you brought it to me, then let me help. The wolf stepped backward. Mara understood. She lifted the pup from the snow and carried it inside. The tiny body felt frighteningly light. She placed it beside the fire, removed her wool cloak, wrapped the pup inside it, and pressed the bundle against her chest. Nothing. No breath. No heartbeat she could feel. Mara's fingers began to tremble. She forced herself to breathe. She had seen dying animals before. She had watched old farmers bring injured horses to her door. She had treated foxes caught in traps, birds with broken wings, lambs born too weak to stand. Sometimes she saved them. Sometimes she didn't. But she had never seen something this young. She placed 2 fingers beneath the pup's jaw. Nothing. Come on. She rubbed its chest. Nothing. She warmed her hands over the fire, then placed them around the pup again. She knew she had seconds, perhaps less. She pressed carefully against the tiny ribs. Once. Twice. Again. Then she leaned down and breathed warmth into the pup's cold mouth. The black wolf stood at the doorway watching every movement. Mara repeated the process. Her hair fell across her face. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she refused to stop. Come back, she whispered. Another breath. Another gentle pressure. Still nothing. Outside, the first light touched the highest trees. Mara's shoulders sagged. For a moment, she thought the pup was gone. Then she felt it. A tiny twitch beneath her palm. Mara's eyes widened. She pressed her fingers against its chest. There. A heartbeat. Weak. Almost impossible to feel. She began again. Warmth. Pressure. Breath. Patience. The pup suddenly jerked. A tiny gasp escaped its throat. Mara froze. Then came a sound so small that it could barely be called a cry. But it was a cry. The pup coughed. Mara pulled it closer. That's it. Another breath. Another cry. This one stronger. The black wolf raised its head. Its ears moved forward. The pup cried again. Mara laughed through her tears. She hadn't even realized she was crying. The wolf stepped into the cottage. Mara expected it to take the pup. Instead, it lowered its enormous head until its nose touched the little white forehead. The pup made a weak sound. The wolf closed its eyes. For the first time since it arrived, the terrible beast looked peaceful. Mara sat beside the fire with the pup against her heart. Outside, the sun began to rise over the mountains. The black wolf looked toward the distant peaks. Then, without warning, it turned and disappeared into the trees. Mara watched the last shadow of it vanish. She looked down at the tiny creature sleeping against her. She had no idea where it came from. She had no idea why the wolf had chosen her. And she had no idea that by saving that tiny heartbeat, she had just stepped into the middle of a war for a kingdom. For 3 days, Mara barely slept. The pup survived the first night, then the second. By the third morning, it had enough strength to crawl across the blanket beside the fire. Mara smiled when she saw it try to stand. Its legs shook. It fell. Mara caught it before its nose touched the floor. "Not yet," she whispered. The pup looked up at her with dark blue eyes. She had named it Snow. It seemed fitting. Outside, winter continued to press against the cottage windows, but inside, the little creature filled the room with warmth. Snow began drinking milk from a shallow wooden bowl. It slept beside the hearth. Sometimes it followed Mara from room to room, stumbling after her on oversized paws. Mara found herself smiling more often. She had lived alone for years. She had become accustomed to the quiet. But now there was scratching at her door, tiny paws against the floor, and soft breathing beside her bed. On the fourth morning, while Mara was cleaning the wound beneath Snow's shoulder, she noticed something strange. She brushed aside the white fur. A silver crescent appeared on the pup's chest. Mara stared. Her fingers stopped. She had seen that symbol before. Not on an animal. In an old book. Years ago, when Mara was a child, her mother had kept a collection of worn histories beneath the floorboards. One story had described the first rulers of Valedorn. It had spoken of wolves who guarded the northern mountains. And it had shown a silver crescent, the mark of the royal bloodline. Mara's stomach tightened. Before she could think further, horses thundered outside. Snow immediately crawled beneath the table. Mara stood. 3 riders appeared through the trees. Then 5. Then 8. Their dark cloaks bore the crest of Valedorn. Mara's hand went instinctively toward the knife hanging beside the hearth. A rider dismounted. He struck the cottage door with his fist. "We know the creature is here." Mara's heart began pounding. She looked beneath the table. Snow was trembling. Mara lifted the floorboard near the hearth and discovered a narrow space beneath the wooden planks. She gently picked up the pup. "Stay quiet." She lowered Snow into the hidden compartment, placed a blanket over the opening, and replaced the board. Then she opened the door. The captain stood outside. Snow blew around his boots. "We're searching for a royal wolf pup." Mara kept her expression calm. "I haven't seen one." The captain looked past her shoulder. "You live alone. I treat animals. Then you know what we are looking for." Mara said nothing. The captain stepped inside. His boots left wet marks across the floor. He searched the shelves, the cupboards, the small sleeping room. Mara's pulse hammered when he approached the hearth. He stopped, looked down, then looked back at her. "What is beneath these boards?" "Firewood." His hand moved toward his sword. Mara heard the faintest movement beneath the floor. "Snow." She quickly stepped between the captain and the hearth. "My cellar is empty." The captain studied her. Then someone outside shouted, "The tracks end here." The captain turned. He swore under his breath and left. Mara waited until the horses disappeared. Only then did she lift the floorboard. Snow crawled into her arms. The pup immediately buried its face against her neck. Mara held it tightly. A short while later, there was another knock. This time, it was not a soldier. A wounded man stood outside. He had a royal cloak but no horse. Blood darkened his sleeve. Mara pulled him inside. "Who did this?" He leaned against the wall. not soldiers. His breathing was uneven. Then who? He looked toward the hidden pup. They're hunting it. Mara's face hardened. Why? The man's eyes filled with fear. Because that pup is the last surviving heir of the northern bloodline. Mara stared at him. He swallowed. The Alpha King has been searching for it since the massacre. A distant howl rolled through the forest. The wounded man looked toward the window. He's coming. Mara frowned. Who? The man whispered the name that made the fire seem suddenly colder. King Rowan. Outside, hooves thundered through the snow. King Rowan arrived after midnight. Mara knew it before she saw him. The horses stopped outside. Men moved through the snow. Then came silence. A man entered the clearing alone. He wore a dark cloak covered in frost. He was younger than Mara had imagined an Alpha King would be, but there was nothing young in his eyes. They carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent too many years waking from the same nightmare. A scar crossed his right eyebrow. His dark hair was wet with melting snow. He approached the cottage door. Mara opened it before he knocked. Their eyes met. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Rowan looked past her. The pup. Mara's fingers tightened around the door. You should come inside. The king entered. 2 guards remained outside. Mara closed the door. Snow appeared from beneath the table. The pup immediately ran toward Rowan. The king dropped to one knee. For the first time, something broke across his face. He reached for Snow with shaking hands. The pup pressed its nose against his palm. Rowan closed his eyes. A long breath escaped him. My sister's child. Mara watched him. Your sister? Rowan nodded. She was killed 3 nights after the attack on the northern estate. His fingers moved gently over Snow's silver crescent. I thought this child died with her. Mara's voice softened. It almost did. Rowan looked at her. What happened? The wolf brought it here. Rowan's expression changed. What wolf? Mara described the enormous black beast. The scar. The pale eyes. The way it had carried Snow through the snow. Rowan looked toward the window. Grim. Mara frowned. Your wolf. My beast. The king stood. He's never carried anything to anyone. He looked at Mara again. Not even to me. Silence settled between them. Mara folded her arms. If the soldiers knew the pup was here, why did they come? Rowan's jaw tightened. Because someone in my court wants Snow dead. Who? I don't know. Mara studied him. You are the king. I know. The answer was quiet. That made it more frightening. Rowan looked down at the pup. I've spent years trusting men who stood beside my throne while secretly sharpening knives behind my back. Mara understood then. The rumors about the Alpha King had not told the whole story. He was not simply feared. He was tired. The next morning, Rowan asked Mara to come to Valedorn. She refused. You want the pup. I want the pup alive. And you think your castle is safer? Rowan looked toward the snow-covered forest. No. The honesty surprised her. I think it is the most dangerous place in my kingdom. Mara stared at him. Then why take us there? Because if I leave you here, they will come again. His gaze moved toward the door. And next time, I may not arrive first. Mara looked at Snow. The pup had fallen asleep beside the fire. She remembered its tiny body lying motionless in the snow. She remembered the first gasp, the first cry. She nodded. Then I go. But someone else was listening. Far away, inside Valedorn's stone walls, Lord Darius stood beside a window overlooking the courtyard. A messenger whispered in his ear. The pup lives. Darius's hand tightened around the edge of the table. And the healer? Alive. Darius turned. His expression held no fear. Only hatred. The healer saved the one creature standing between me and the throne. He walked toward the fire. Then she must die before the king understands what she has found. They did not reach Valedorn. Not that day. The attack came during the second night. Snow fell so heavily that the world outside Mara's cottage seemed to disappear. Rowan had left before sunset to investigate a false report about soldiers moving through the northern pass. That report had been planted. Mara realized it too late. The first arrow struck the cottage wall. The second shattered the window. Grim appeared outside. He roared. Mara grabbed Snow. Men surrounded the cottage. Fire touched the roof. Mara wrapped the pup inside her cloak and ran through the back door. The forest swallowed her. Snow struck her face. Branches tore at her sleeves. Behind her came shouting. She heard horses. She heard men calling her name. Then she heard Grim. The great black wolf raced beside her. He disappeared between the trees and returned seconds later, forcing Mara toward a narrow trail between two cliffs. She followed. The path descended sharply. A frozen river waited below. Mara slipped. Her knees struck ice. Snow cried beneath her cloak. Mara pulled the pup closer. I have you. She crossed the river on her hands and knees. Behind her, torchlight appeared. The soldiers had found the trail. Mara climbed. Her lungs burned. Her fingers bled. The mountain seemed endless. Then Grim stopped. He looked back. Mara saw the soldiers approaching. There were too many. She understood. If she continued running with Snow, they would catch both of them. She looked down at the pup. Its small face rested against her chest. She remembered the morning she found it. Lifeless. Cold. Forgotten. Mara kissed its forehead. Then she made a choice. She placed Snow beneath a fallen pine and covered the pup with her cloak. She stood. Then she ran in the opposite direction. The soldiers followed her. Mara knew what she was doing. She was leading them away. Her legs screamed. The wind cut through her clothes. She stumbled toward a narrow ridge. Behind her, riders shouted. She reached the edge. There was nowhere left to go. A horse stopped several steps away. The captain raised his weapon. Mara looked down. Far below, the forest disappeared into darkness. She closed her eyes. Then a sound came from behind her. A tiny cry. Mara opened her eyes. Snow had crawled from beneath the pine. The pup stood on shaking legs. The captain turned. The pup cried again. But this time, something answered. One wolf. Then another. Then 10. Howls rose from the valley. They echoed against the mountains. The horses panicked. The soldiers turned. Shapes appeared among the trees. White wolves. Gray wolves. Black wolves. Dozens. The entire mountain seemed to awaken. Grim stepped forward and stood between Mara and the soldiers. The captain lowered his sword. For the first time, fear appeared on his face. The wolves did not attack. They simply watched. Then the mountains thundered with another sound. Horses. Rowan. He rode into the clearing with his guards behind him. He saw Mara. He saw Snow. Then he saw the wolves. Rowan dismounted slowly. He walked toward Mara. She was shaking so badly, she could barely stand. He caught her before she fell. For a moment, she allowed herself to lean against him. Then Rowan looked at the wolves. His expression changed. My father told me this was only a legend. Mara looked toward the mountains. What is? Rowan's voice was barely more than a whisper. The old pact. The wolves lowered their heads. Every one of them. Not to Rowan. To Mara. And the little pup at her feet. Veildorn had never seen anything like it. The wolves followed them to the kingdom. They did not cross the walls. They simply remained beyond them. Watching. Waiting. Inside the castle, nobles whispered whenever Mara walked past. Some called her a village healer. Others called her a witch. A few called her the woman who had awakened the northern wolves. Mara ignored them all. Her attention remained on Snow. The pup grew stronger every day. It slept beside the royal hearth. It chased servants through the corridors. It followed Mara wherever she went. And whenever Rowan entered the room, Snow's tail began to move. The king changed too. He began eating beside Mara instead of alone. He started listening before giving orders. Sometimes Mara caught him watching Snow with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Peace. But peace in a royal court rarely lasted. Mara began studying the silver mark. She searched the old records. Most had been damaged by time. Others had been deliberately removed. One night, beneath the oldest archive, she discovered a hidden manuscript. Its pages were brittle. The drawings showed a white wolf standing beside the first king of Veildorn. Underneath it was a silver crescent. Mara read the old words slowly. The wolves were not servants of the crown. They were guardians of the bloodline. And the marked child was not simply an heir. The pup was the living seal of an ancient promise. If the royal bloodline was ever threatened, the wolves would awaken. Mara understood why Darius wanted Snow dead. She also understood something worse. Darius had known. For years. The massacre had not been an accident. He had wanted the bloodline erased. Mara ran to Rowan. "We have to tell the court." Rowan read the manuscript. His face hardened. Before he could answer, smoke entered beneath the archive door. Mara turned. Fire. Someone had set the records ablaze. Rowan rushed toward the exit. "Stay here." Mara shook her head. "The evidence is inside. The fire is spreading." "I know." She ran into the flames. Smoke filled her lungs. Shelves collapsed around her. She searched desperately. One scroll. Another. Then she saw a metal box beneath a fallen beam. Mara reached for it. The ceiling cracked. A burning beam fell. Rowan caught her round the waist and pulled her backward. They crashed onto the stone floor. Mara coughed. Rowan held her against his chest. "You could have died." She looked at the box. "But I didn't." He stared at her. Then he smiled faintly. For the first time, Mara saw the man beneath the crown. Not the Alpha King. Just Rowan. A man who had almost lost another person he cared about. They opened the metal box. Inside were letters, orders, payments, names, and one signature. Darius. The truth was finally in their hands. But they were too late. The winter gathering had already begun. Thousands filled the great hall. Nobles, soldiers, merchants, clans. Rowan entered carrying the evidence. Darius stood waiting. Then the doors slammed shut. Steel flashed. Guards loyal to Darius surrounded the king. Mara's heart dropped. Darius stepped forward. "Your reign ends tonight." Rowan looked around the hall. His own kingdom had turned against him. Darius lifted the crown and placed it upon his own head. The castle fell silent. Outside the walls, the wolves had stopped howling. They stood beneath the moonlight in perfect silence. Inside, Rowan was dragged from the throne. Mara watched from the edge of the hall. Snow was hidden beneath her cloak. Darius looked down at the king. "You always believed loyalty was something you could command." Rowan said nothing. Darius smiled. Then he turned toward Mara. "And you?" Mara felt Snow move beneath the cloak. "You should have stayed in your little cottage." Mara stepped forward. "I almost did." Darius raised his hand. A guard seized her. Snow cried. The sound echoed through the hall. Everyone stopped. Mara pulled back her cloak. The white pup stood on the stone floor. Its silver crescent shone beneath the torchlight. Darius's face changed. Snow walked toward the center of the hall. One tiny paw, then another. The great doors suddenly shook. Once, twice. The guards turned. A howl rose outside. Then another. Then hundreds. The castle windows trembled. The wolves had come, but they did not attack. They waited. Mara understood. They were waiting for the truth. She opened the metal box. Letters spilled across the floor. She showed the court the first order. Then another. The payments Darius had made. The names of the men who carried out the massacre. The final document bore Darius's own seal. The hall erupted. Nobles shouted. Soldiers lowered their weapons. Men who had served Darius stepped away from him. His face twisted with rage. "You have no right." Mara looked at him. The dead had no voice. She lifted the final letter. "So, I brought their voices here." Darius lunged. Rowan broke free. The two men collided beside the throne. Steel rang through the hall. Darius fought with fury. Rowan fought with something different. Restraint. When Darius finally fell, Rowan stood over him. The blade in his hand trembled. Darius looked up. "Kill me." Rowan stared at him, then lowered the sword. "No." Darius's eyes widened. "You deserve to die." Rowan looked toward the gathered kingdom. "But I will not make your death another secret." The guards seized Darius. He was dragged from the hall while the kingdom watched. Outside, The wolves remained silent. Then Snow walked toward the open doors. Grim appeared beyond them. The giant black wolf lowered his head. Snow ran forward. For a moment, the enormous beast touched his nose to the pup's forehead. Mara watched. Tears filled her eyes. The little creature that had once arrived without a breath now stood beneath the winter moon surrounded by wolves. Alive. Safe. Home. Months passed. The snow melted. The rivers broke free from the ice. Green returned to the hills around Valedorn. Rowan rebuilt the northern villages. He opened the royal stores to families who had lost everything. He ordered the old hunting laws changed so the wolves of the northern mountains would never again be hunted for sport. And Mara returned to the work she loved. She opened a healing house at the edge of the kingdom. People came from distant villages. They brought injured horses, sick children, broken-winged birds, dogs caught in traps. Mara treated them all. Sometimes Rowan visited. He never arrived with an army. He usually came alone. Snow grew quickly. The little white pup became a strong young wolf, though he still slept beside Mara's door. Grim remained nearby, watching, guarding, waiting. One spring evening, Mara stood outside her healing house as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Rowan approached. Snow ran past him. Mara smiled. "You're late." Rowan looked at the wolf racing across the grass. "I was helping a farmer." "You?" He smiled. "Apparently kings can carry sacks of grain." Mara laughed. The sound carried across the meadow. For a moment, neither spoke. The mountains glowed gold. A cool breeze moved through the trees. Far above them, wolves called to one another. Rowan looked toward Mara. "You could live in the castle." She shook her head. "I know. You would never have to worry about winter again." "I know. You could have anything you wanted." Mara looked at Snow, then at the mountains. "I already have what I wanted." Rowan followed her gaze. The king nodded. He understood. He had spent years believing power meant holding tightly to everything he feared losing. Mara had taught him something else. Sometimes love meant opening your hand. Sometimes strength meant choosing mercy. And sometimes the smallest life could carry the greatest hope. Years later, people still told the story. They told their children about the morning a giant black wolf crossed the frozen forest carrying a pup that was not breathing. They told them about the young healer who refused to give up. They told them how one tiny cry awakened wolves across the mountains. They told them about a king who nearly lost his crown because he trusted the wrong men. And they told them about the woman who never wanted a throne, never carried a sword, and never commanded an army. Mara simply held a dying creature against her heart and refused to let it go. That was all. No prophecy had chosen her. No crown had prepared her. No great warrior had taught her how to fight. Compassion had. And sometimes, in a world built on fear and power, compassion was the strongest force of all. On the first winter morning of every year, the people of Valedorn still gathered at the edge of the whispering forest. They left small bowls of food beneath the pine trees. They watched the mountains, and if the snow was deep enough, they sometimes saw enormous paw prints crossing the white ground. The elders would smile, the children would whisper, and somewhere beyond the trees, the wolves would answer. Because the old pact had never truly been about a crown. It had been about a promise. A promise that the weak would not always be abandoned. A promise that the forgotten could still be found. A promise that one heartbeat, no matter how small, was worth fighting for. And whenever Mara remembered that terrible morning, she could still feel the tiny body lying cold in her hands. She could still remember the silence, the fear, the impossible stillness. And then she remembered the sound that changed everything. One tiny gasp, one trembling breath, one fragile cry. The first sound of a life returning. And she would smile, because that little cry had not only brought a pup back from the edge of death. It had brought a broken king back to his people. It had brought justice to a kingdom. It had awakened the wolves. And it had taught an entire generation that sometimes the greatest heroes do not carry swords. Sometimes they simply kneel in the snow, pick up something everyone else has already given up on, and whisper, "Come back." And sometimes, the world listens.